Who let this black kid into first class? Get her back to economy. Now! Sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but your son... I know sign language. I can help. Help? You? Eyes scanning her. Cornrows, faded hoodie, worn sneakers. I paid $300,000 for specialists. Harvard trained, the best in America, and some little black girl from the back of the plane thinks she can do better? Please, sir. He's scared. I just want to... What's your mother do? Cleans toilets, mops floors. A cruel smile. Security. Remove this janitor's daughter from my cabin before she touches my son. His deaf boy kept screaming. 30,000 feet up. A rich white father with everything. A poor black girl with nothing but her hands. 15 minutes later, that man was in tears, begging her for help. Subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Let's go back 6 hours. Los Angeles International Airport. 9 p.m. Gate 42B. The terminal hummed with that particular exhaustion that comes from too many delayed flights and not enough coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale, tired glow. Somewhere down the concourse, a baby was crying. A janitor pushed a mop bucket past a Starbucks that had already closed for the night. In the last row of plastic seats near the window, a woman sat with her eyes closed. Diane Owens was 38 years old, though tonight she looked older. Her shoulders curved inward like she was carrying something heavy. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from lack of sleep, though there was that too, but from tears. She'd buried her mother 3 days ago. The funeral had been small, a church in Compton, folding chairs, a casket that Diane couldn't really afford but bought anyway because Mama deserved better than pine. Her sisters had come, all 3 of them, and for a few hours the old arguments had been set aside. But now they were back to their lives, and Diane was flying home to New York with her daughter and an ache in her chest that wouldn't go away. Beside her, a girl sat with her feet dangling above the floor. Daisy Owens was 10 years old, small for her age, with neat cornrow braids and a faded hoodie bearing the logo of Jefferson Elementary. The hoodie was too big, a hand-me-down from somewhere, and the sleeves covered her hands when she wasn't paying attention. She was reading a book. Thick, small print. Definitely not a children's book. The cover showed 2 hands forming shapes in the air, a guide to American Sign Language. The 2 of them were the only black faces in this section of the terminal. Diane had noticed. She always noticed. It was the kind of thing you learn to track without thinking about it. Where you were, who was around, how many exits. Not paranoid, just aware. The way you had to be. A few seats away, an elderly white woman with silver hair was struggling with her phone. She kept tapping the screen, frowning, holding it at arm's length like the problem was her eyesight. Daisy looked up from her book. She watched for a moment. Then she set the book aside, slid off her chair, and walked over. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes took in the cornrows, the faded hoodie, the brown skin. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or caution. Then Daisy's hands moved. Fluid, graceful. She was signing. The old woman's expression transformed completely. Her whole body relaxed. She signed back, her movements slower, arthritic, but unmistakably fluent. They went back and forth for almost a minute, a silent conversation filled with smiles and nodding, and the kind of connection that transcends spoken words. Then Daisy pointed at the phone, took it gently, adjusted something on the screen, and handed it back. The woman signed "thank you" with both hands pressed to her lips, then moving outward. Her eyes were bright with gratitude. Daisy signed something back that made the woman laugh, a real laugh, surprised and delighted. Diane watched her daughter return to her seat. Despite everything, the grief, the exhaustion, the ache that hadn't left her chest since the hospital called, she felt a small warmth bloom in her stomach. That was her girl, always finding the people who needed finding. Now boarding first-class passengers for Flight 142 to New York JFK. The announcement crackled through the terminal. Diane watched the privileged few rise from their seats, mostly men in suits, a few women in designer clothes, all of them moving with that particular confidence that comes from never having to check the price of anything. One man walked past without looking at them. Not through them. That would have at least acknowledged they existed. He simply didn't see them. His eyes slid over Diane and Daisy like they were part of the furniture, like they were the empty seats and the scuffed floor and the fluorescent lights. Richard Ashford III. He was tall, mid-40s, silver threading through dark hair at the temples. His suit was gray, clearly expensive, clearly tailored to his exact measurements. AirPods sat in his ears, white against his skin. His phone was already in his hand, thumb scrolling through emails that couldn't wait. Behind him, a small boy trailed like an afterthought. Tyler Ashford was 7 years old. He walked with his head down, shoulders hunched, clutching an iPad to his chest like a shield. A cochlear implant curved behind his right ear, the external processor blinking with a small blue light. The boy's mouth moved. No sound came out, or if it did, it was swallowed by the terminal noise. His free hand made a shape in the air. A sign. Daisy recognized it immediately. Her breath caught. Richard didn't even glance back. He was already at the gate, handing over his boarding pass, exchanging a few words with the gate agent who smiled at him the way gate agents smile at first-class passengers. Then he stepped through to the jetway, and Tyler hurried to catch up. But in that moment, that brief moment before Tyler disappeared, his hand had been signing something. Over and over. The same word. "Mama," Daisy whispered. "That boy is signing." Diane's hand found her daughter's shoulder. "Don't stare, baby." But he was trying to tell his dad something, and his dad didn't even... "I know." Diane's voice was gentle but firm. The voice of someone who had learned a long time ago which battles to fight. "But it's not our business. Come on. They're boarding economy soon." The line formed. Diane and Daisy took their place at the back, where they always ended up. A man in a polo shirt stepped in front of them without a word. No "excuse me," no acknowledgement, just a shoulder and a back, like they weren't even there. Diane inhaled slowly, let it out, said nothing. Daisy squeezed her mother's hand. They shuffled forward, through the gate, down the jetway, into the plane. First class was a different world. Wide leather seats that looked like they could swallow you whole. Champagne in actual glasses. Flight attendants who smiled like they meant it, like your comfort was their genuine concern. Daisy caught a glimpse through the curtain as they passed. Tyler was in a window seat, iPad already glowing in his lap. His father sat beside him, AirPods still in, laptop open on the tray table, fingers already typing. The boy was signing something with one hand. Small movements, almost hidden against his chest. Richard didn't notice, or didn't understand, or didn't care. He just reached over without looking and handed Tyler a bag of chips from his pocket. Daisy's feet slowed. "Keep moving, baby." Diane's hand on her back, gentle but insistent. "We don't belong here." Not bitter, just fact, the kind of truth you learn to carry without letting it break you. They walked to the back of the plane. Row 34, the last row. The row where the seats don't recline and the engine noise never stops and you're first to smell every trip to the bathroom. Seat C, middle. The worst seat on the plane. Daisy climbed over the man in the aisle seat, who didn't stand up to let her pass, and settled into her spot. Diane took the aisle because at least that meant one armrest. The girl looked toward the front of the plane, where the curtain had already been drawn between first class and everyone else. Somewhere up there, a 7-year-old boy was trying to talk to a father who wouldn't listen. And Daisy couldn't stop thinking about what he'd been signing. Just one word. Over and over. Scared. The plane climbed into darkness. Below, Los Angeles spread out like a circuit board. A million lights arranged in grids and clusters, fading to black as they punched through the clouds. The cabin lights dimmed to that soft blue glow that's supposed to help you sleep. Passengers settled into their seats, their screens, their attempts at rest. Daisy had her book open, but she wasn't reading. Her mother's head rested against her shoulder, breath finally evening out into something like real sleep. 3 days of funeral arrangements, of family drama, of holding it together for everyone else. Diane deserved this small peace. Daisy didn't want to move and wake her, so she sat still, watching the seatback screen in front of her cycle through its demo mode, listening to the white noise of the engines, thinking about the boy in first class. At first, she thought she'd imagined it. A sound, not quite a scream, not quite a cry. Something raw and wordless, like an animal in distress. The kind of sound that bypassed language entirely and went straight to the part of your brain that knew something was wrong. It came again, louder. Diane stirred but didn't wake. Her body was too exhausted to respond to anything short of an emergency. Around them, other passengers shifted, heads turned. People looked at each other, then toward first class, trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. The sound grew. It wasn't a tantrum. Daisy had heard enough tantrums at her mother's school to know the difference. Tantrums had a rhythm to them, a rise and fall, a demand for attention. This was something else entirely. This was fear given voice, panic without words, the sound of someone trapped inside themselves with no way out. She remembered what her mother had told her about cochlear implants, how the cabin pressure during flights could make them uncomfortable, sometimes painful, how the sounds could become distorted, overwhelming, terrifying, how some kids just took them off to escape, and then they were alone in the silence, cut off from the hearing world completely. A flight attendant hurried past, face tight with professional concern, then another, moving faster. The crying intensified, high, rhythmic, desperate, like waves crashing against rocks. Other passengers were sitting up now, craning their necks, murmuring to each other. What's going on up there? Is that a kid? Somebody shut that kid up. Is there a doctor on board? Daisy gently shifted her mother's head to rest against the window shade. The plastic was cold, not comfortable, but Diane was tired enough that she just murmured and stayed asleep. Slowly, Daisy unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood on her toes in the cramped space between seats, trying to see over the rows of headrests. Through the gap in the curtain, pulled back now by a flight attendant rushing through, she could see movement in first class. A man standing in the aisle. Richard Ashford, his expensive suit jacket off now, his face twisted with frustration and something else. Something that might have been fear. And Tyler. The boy was in his seat, but barely. His knees were pulled to his chest, his body curled into a ball. His hands weren't just over his ears, they were pulling at his ears, at the cochlear implant, fingers scrabbling at the device like it was burning him. Then he yanked it free and threw it. The cochlear implant bounced off the window and disappeared somewhere under the seat in front. Without it, Tyler was in complete silence, complete isolation. A 7-year-old boy trapped in a metal tube hurtling through the sky, and he couldn't hear anything at all. His mouth was open, and that sound kept coming. That terrible, wordless keening that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. Richard grabbed his son's wrists. Tyler! Tyler, stop! Look at me! Stop! But Tyler wasn't looking. His eyes were squeezed shut. His body was rigid with terror. A flight attendant approached with an iPad, holding it out like an offering. As if a screen could fix this. As if another device could reach through the wall of fear. Tyler shoved it away without even seeing it. The iPad clattered to the floor. Sir, is everything okay? The flight attendant's voice was strained, barely audible over Tyler's cries. Richard's voice cracked. He's fine. He does this sometimes. Give us a minute. But a minute passed. Then another. Then another. Tyler started hitting his head against the seat. Once. Twice. Hard enough that Daisy could hear the thud from 20 rows away. His father grabbed him, tried to hold him still, and Tyler's cries turned into something that sounded almost like a howl. A wolf caught in a trap. Daisy's chest hurt. Her eyes burned. She knew that sound. She'd heard it before. From kids at her mother's school who couldn't find the words, whose fear got so big it had to come out somehow, through their bodies because their voices couldn't carry it. She knew what Tyler needed. And it wasn't an iPad. It wasn't words he couldn't hear. It wasn't hands holding him down, trapping him further. "Mama!" Daisy touched her mother's arm. "Mama, wake up!" Diane's eyes opened instantly, a mother's reflex honed by years of late-night fevers and bad dreams. "What's wrong? What is it?" "The boy from the gate, the one who was signing." Daisy's voice was steady, but her hands were trembling. "He's scared, Mama, really scared. And nobody knows how to help him. But I think I can." Diane sat up, looked toward first class. The crying was impossible to ignore now. Half the plane was awake, passengers shifting uncomfortably, shooting annoyed glances toward the curtain. "Baby, that's not our—" "Mama." Daisy met her mother's eyes. 10 years old, but in that moment, she looked older, more certain. "Please." Diane Owens looked at her daughter, small for her age, wearing a hoodie with a fraying hem, sneakers she'd outgrown 6 months ago but they couldn't afford to replace yet, and eyes that had never asked for anything like this before. Diane exhaled slowly, made a decision. "Go," she said. "I'm right behind you." Daisy was already moving. She walked up the aisle with purpose, past rows of annoyed passengers, past a man who muttered, "Finally, someone's doing something," past a woman shielding her toddler's ears from the noise. She reached the curtain that separated economy from first class, and she pushed through. The flight attendant caught her before she'd taken 3 steps. "Miss, you can't be here." The voice was polite, professional, the kind of politeness that's really a wall. The hand on Daisy's shoulder was firm, not rough, but unmovable. "I know sign language," Daisy said. She had to raise her voice to be heard over Tyler's cries, which had settled into a rhythmic sobbing now. "I think I can help him." The flight attendant, a woman in her 30s, blonde hair pulled back tight, makeup perfect even at this hour, looked at Daisy. Really looked. A 10-year-old black girl, cornrows slightly fuzzy from the long day, faded hoodie 3 sizes too big, sneakers with the soles wearing through at the toe, standing in first class like she'd wandered into a country where she didn't have a visa. The attendant's eyes flicked to Richard Ashford, asking permission without words. Richard had turned at the commotion. He was still holding Tyler's wrists, loosely now because the boy had stopped thrashing and was just crying, his body shaking with exhausted sobs. Richard looked at Daisy. His gaze started at her feet, moved up slowly, took in the shoes, the clothes, the hair, the skin. His expression didn't change, not exactly, but something shifted behind his eyes. A quick calculation, a sorting, a dismissal. He didn't ask what she knew about sign language, didn't ask where she'd learned it or how long she'd been practicing, or if she had any experience with deaf children. Didn't ask anything at all, because he'd already decided. "We're fine," he said. Not to Daisy, to the flight attendant. His eyes barely touched Daisy before moving past her. "Go back to your seat." "But sir, she says she knows—" "Make sure economy passengers stay in their section." The words hung in the air. Economy passengers. Her section. The invisible line that separated people like him from people like her. Daisy didn't move. "Sir?" She tried again, keeping her voice calm. "I grew up around deaf kids. I know what he needs. I can... You grew up around deaf kids? Richard's voice dripped with something that wasn't quite contempt. Something almost worse. Amusement. Like she'd said something funny. Where? In some community center? Some after-school program? He looked at her again, really seeing her this time, but only seeing what he wanted to see. Look, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I've hired the best specialists in the country for Tyler, the best therapists, the best doctors. He gestured vaguely at her worn sneakers, her too big hoodie. And you're what, 10? 11? Go back to your seat, kid. Let the adults handle this. He turned back to Tyler, dismissing her as completely as if she'd vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. Tyler's cries had quieted slightly. His hands were moving now, not thrashing but signing, over and over, the same word, scared, scared, scared. Daisy understood every movement, every repetition, every desperate attempt to communicate. Sir, I said, we're fine. Sharper now. Annoyed. The voice of someone who wasn't used to being argued with. Flight attendant, would you please escort this young lady back to her... Mr. Ashford. A new voice. Irritated. A man in 3A, salt and pepper hair, tie loosened, looking like he'd been trying to sleep. For God's sake, can you just get him to stop? Some of us have meetings in the morning. I'm handling it. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it doesn't look like you're handling anything. I said I'm handling it. The outburst echoed through the cabin. Tyler flinched violently. His hands flew up to cover his face, even though he couldn't hear the yelling. But he could feel it. The tension, the anger, the vibrations in the air. His crying started building again, louder, more desperate. Daisy felt a hand on her shoulder. Different this time. Familiar. Her mother had followed her, just like she'd promised. Diane stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Daisy. Protective, but not aggressive. Sir? Diane's voice was calm, steady. The voice of someone who had spent years navigating spaces where she wasn't wanted, dealing with people who looked at her the way Richard was looking at her now. My daughter has been around deaf children her whole life. She volunteers at my workplace, a school for the deaf. She's helped kids younger than your son through moments exactly like this. She might be able to... Richard's head swiveled. His eyes landed on Diane, took her in the same way he'd taken in Daisy. The tired clothes, the red-rimmed eyes, the brown skin. A school janitor? He almost laughed. Almost. And your daughter? What is she? Some kind of child prodigy? A 10-year-old deaf whisperer? His voice was smooth, controlled. The voice of someone who negotiated billion-dollar deals. No offense, ma'am, but I think I know what's best for my own child. Ma'am. Polite on the surface. A razor wrapped in silk. Diane's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. We're just trying to help, sir. And I'm telling you, we don't need help. Richard stepped closer, using his height, his presence, his expensive suit. Especially not from... He stopped himself. Smiled. That smooth, practiced smile. Look, I'm sure you mean well. I'm sure you're very good at what you do. But Tyler has specialists. Real specialists. People with degrees and training and experience. This isn't something a child can fix. Behind him, Tyler was scratching at his neck now, his fingernails leaving red lines on his skin, not breaking through yet, but getting closer. Sir, the lead flight attendant cut in, her voice tight. If the child cannot be calmed, we may need to consider an emergency landing. FAA regulations require us to... I know the regulations. Richard's control was slipping. The mask was cracking. I've read every regulation there is. Just give me a minute. But minutes had already passed. Many minutes. And Tyler was getting worse, not better. The boy's hand found his cochlear implant on the seat where it had landed after his father retrieved it. He grabbed it and threw it again, harder this time. It hit the ceiling and dropped somewhere behind the seats. Richard lunged for it. "Tyler! Don't, for God's sake!" Tyler screamed. Not a cry. A scream. Raw, primal, the sound of a child pushed past every limit he had. And then he started hitting his head against the headrest. Once, twice, 3 times. Hard. Richard grabbed him, tried to pin his arms, hold him still, but Tyler fought with the strength of pure terror, thrashing, kicking, his small body surprisingly powerful. "Stop it! Tyler, stop!" He wasn't talking to his son anymore. He was begging, and Tyler couldn't hear him anyway. Daisy watched. Her chest felt tight, like something was squeezing her heart. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She knew what that felt like. Not personally. She could hear just fine. But she'd sat with kids at her mother's school during moments like this. She'd held their hands. She'd learned that sometimes the worst thing you could do was hold them down, trap them further, make them feel more alone. Sometimes they just needed someone to see them. Really see them. "Please," she said. One more time. Quiet, but clear. "Let me try." Richard didn't even look at her. "Get her out of here." The flight attendant reached for Daisy's arm, and that's when the woman in 2B stood up. She was old, 70 at least, maybe older. White hair swept back from a lined face that had seen decades of everything. Pearl earrings, a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than Diane made in a month. She'd been sitting quietly this whole time, watching everything with sharp, assessing eyes. Mrs. Patterson. "Mr. Ashford," her voice cut through the chaos like a knife through butter. Not loud, not angry, just absolutely, completely commanding. The voice of someone who had spent a lifetime being listened to. Richard turned. Mrs. Patterson looked at him with eyes that had clearly seen decades of boardrooms and charity galas and country clubs and men exactly like him. Eyes that were not impressed. "I've sat here watching you refuse help from the only person on this plane who seems to know what she's doing." Her voice was ice and steel wrapped in cashmere. "I don't care if she's from first class or coach. I don't care what she looks like. I don't care how old she is or where she goes to school or what her mother does for a living." She pointed at Tyler, who had gone still in his father's arms, chest heaving, face wet with tears and snot. "That child is suffering. Let her try." The cabin was silent. Every eye in first class was on Richard Ashford, the man who always had the answer, the man who hired the best specialists, the man who knew what was best for his own child. He looked at Mrs. Patterson, at the other passengers watching, judging, at the flight attendant with her hand hovering near her radio, probably ready to call the captain. He looked at his son, exhausted, terrified, still signing weakly with one trembling hand, scared. And then he looked at Daisy, a 10-year-old girl in a faded hoodie, standing in first class, refusing to leave, offering to help. His jaw worked. Something in his face, pride maybe, or shame, or both, fought against something else. "Fine." The word came out like it cost him something, like it physically hurt. "You have 2 minutes." Daisy was already moving. Daisy didn't run to Tyler. She walked, slowly, deliberately, keeping her movements soft, her body language open. She stopped about 3 feet from the boy. Then she sat down in the aisle, right there on the floor of first class, her faded hoodie against the expensive carpet. She made herself small, made herself level with him. And she waited. Tyler was still curled in his seat, face buried in his knees. His father had stepped back, reluctantly, his hands still half raised like he might need to grab his son again at any moment. Daisy didn't speak. Speaking was useless. Tyler couldn't hear her. Instead, she lifted her hands, palms open, fingers relaxed, visible, not reaching, not grabbing, just there. "I see you." Tyler's crying had quieted to hitching breaths. His face was still hidden, but his body was less tense, less coiled. Then his head moved, just slightly, just enough to see Daisy through the gap between his knees. He saw her hands, his breath caught. Daisy waited, patient, still. Tyler's head lifted a little more. His eyes, red, wet, exhausted, found hers. She signed, slow, clear, the way you talk to someone who's drowning. Hello. Just that. One sign. One word. Tyler's mouth opened, closed. His hands twitched in his lap. Daisy signed again. My name is Daisy. She fingerspelled it carefully. Then she made a small flower shape with her fingers near her cheek, her name sign, like the flower. Tyler stared. Behind her, Daisy heard Richard shift his weight, heard him start to say something. Mrs. Patterson's voice, sharp and quiet. Let her work. Silence. Tyler's hands moved, shaky, uncertain, scared. Daisy nodded, signed back. I know. Scary up here. Ears hurt? Tyler's eyes widened. Someone understood. His hands moved faster now, loud, then quiet. Hurt. Dad doesn't understand. Nobody understands. Daisy felt something twist in her chest. I understand, she signed. Want me to tell you a story? Make the scared smaller? Tyler hesitated. His hands went still. Then, slowly, he nodded. Daisy smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one, a gentle one. And she began. Her hands moved differently now. Not just signing words, painting pictures. This was what she'd learned at her mother's school, sitting in the corner during story time, watching the deaf teachers bring tales to life without a single sound. ASL storytelling wasn't just translation, it was transformation. Once, her hand said, there was a little cat. She made a cat, whiskers with her fingers, ears with her hands. The cat lived on a cloud. Her hands became a cloud, soft and floating. But one day, she paused, made a worried face. Tyler was watching intently now, his body turned toward her, his tears forgotten. One day, the cloud floated away. The cat got lost. Tyler's eyes went wide. His hands moved. Lost? Lost, Daisy confirmed. The cat couldn't find home. The sky was very big, very scary. She made the sky. Vast, endless, overwhelming. Tyler nodded. He knew that feeling. But then... Micro-pause. Tyler leaned forward. The cat met a bird, wings spreading from her fingertips. The bird said, "Why are you sad, little cat?" The cat said, "I'm lost. I'm scared. I can't find home." The bird said, "I will help you. I know all the clouds." Tyler's breathing had steadied. His body had uncurled. He was sitting up now, completely focused on Daisy's hands. They flew together. Both hands moving now, cat and bird, side by side, soaring through imaginary sky. Through the wind. Her hands made wind, swirling. Through the rain, rain falling from above. Through the lightning. A flash, sharp movement, then stillness. And then... She slowed, built the anticipation. They found... Tyler signed, urgent. What? What did they find? Daisy smiled. A rainbow. She painted it in the air, arc of color stretching from one hand to the other. Tyler's face lit up, and behind the rainbow, home? Tyler signed, home. Daisy let the words settle. Then, the cat wasn't lost anymore, because the cat found a friend. And when you have a friend, you're never really lost. Her hands stilled. The cabin was silent, not the tense silence of before. Something different, something held. Tyler sat completely still for a moment, Then his hands moved. More? Daisy laughed, a soft, surprised sound. You want more? Tyler nodded vigorously, and then he signed something that made Daisy's breath catch. You're good at stories, like the teacher at my old school, before the specialists. Before the specialists. Before his father decided he knew what was best. Before Tyler was pulled out of the deaf community and handed to hearing experts who could fix him. Daisy glanced back at Richard. The man stood frozen. His face was strange, cracked somehow, like a mask with fissures running through it. He was watching his son, really watching him. Maybe for the first time in a long time. Diane had appeared at the edge of the curtain. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. That fierce, quiet pride that Daisy knew better than any expression in the world. Tyler signed again. What's your name sign? The flower? Daisy showed him again. Daisy. My mom named me after her favorite flower. Tyler considered this. Then his hands moved, more confident now. My name sign is... He made a shape. A small wave, like water, then tapped his chest. Tyler, because I used to love swimming. Before. That word again. Do you still like swimming? Daisy asked. Tyler's face fell slightly. Dad says the cochlear implant can't get wet, so I stopped. Daisy nodded slowly, filed that away. The cat in the story, Tyler signed. Did the cat have a name? Daisy smiled. What do you want to name it? Tyler thought. Then, carefully, Cloud. Because that's where it lived. Cloud. Daisy nodded. That's a good name. Can you tell me more about Cloud? I can tell you lots of stories about Cloud. Tyler's face broke into a smile. A real smile. The kind that transformed his whole face, that made him look like any happy 7-year-old. He reached out and took Daisy's hand. His fingers were small. Warm, still slightly trembling from the aftermath of his meltdown. He signed one-handed. Friend? Daisy signed back. Friend. The silence in first class stretched. But it was a different silence now. Not absence of noise. Presence of something else. Richard Ashford III hadn't moved. He stood in the aisle, watching his son hold hands with a stranger's daughter, watching them communicate in a language he didn't understand, watching Tyler smile in a way Richard suddenly realized he hadn't seen in months. His throat worked. His eyes were wet. And somewhere in the back of the first-class cabin, Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and whispered to no one in particular, "Well, would you look at that?" Nobody moved. The silence hung in the cabin like something physical, something you could touch. Tyler had shifted to sit on the floor beside Daisy, still holding her hand, signing questions about Cloud the cat. Did Cloud have siblings? Did Cloud like fish? Could Cloud teach him to walk on clouds? And Daisy answered, patiently, joyfully, inventing a whole world with her hands. Richard stood in the aisle, forgotten. The man who controlled billions. The man who hired the best. The man whose name was on buildings. Watching a 10-year-old girl do what he couldn't. The lead flight attendant approached carefully. "Sir, is everything... Are we okay here?" Richard didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on his son. On Tyler's hands, moving in that language Richard had never bothered to learn. On Tyler's face, animated, alive, engaged. When was the last time Tyler had looked like that? Richard tried to remember. Couldn't. Mrs. Patterson stood from her seat, slowly, her aged joints protesting. She walked to Richard, placed a hand on his arm. "Mr. Ashford." He turned. His face was strange, stripped of the polished confidence, the boardroom control. "How did she do that?" His voice came out rough. I've tried everything. Specialists, therapies, the best cochlear implant money can buy, and she just sat down and..." She listened, Mrs. Patterson said simply. But No, Mr. Ashford. You heard. That's not the same thing. Daisy was showing Tyler how to make cloud fly through a storm. Her hands painted lightning, thunder, wind, and Tyler's hands followed, learning, copying, his face bright with concentration. Your son has been talking to you? Mrs. Patterson said quietly. This whole time. You just didn't know how to hear him. Richard's chest heaved. I thought... His voice cracked. I thought if I could fix his hearing, everything would be okay. The specialists said, Your son isn't broken, Mr. Ashford. He just speaks a different language. Richard's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily in the nearest seat, seat 2A, which definitely wasn't his, but nobody said anything. He watched his son. Tyler was signing now without help. A story of his own. Something about Cloud meeting a fish that could fly. His hands moved with growing confidence, and Daisy watched, nodding, responding, encouraging. 7 years. Richard had spent 7 years trying to make Tyler hear, and he'd never once tried to learn how Tyler spoke. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Tyler looked up, saw his father watching. His hands stilled mid-sign. For a moment, father and son just looked at each other. Then Tyler signed something. Small. Hesitant. Daisy didn't translate. But Richard saw his son's hands move, saw the question in the gesture, saw Tyler's eyes, hopeful and scared at the same time. What? Richard's voice broke. What did he say? Daisy looked at him. Her face was unreadable. He asked if you're mad at him. The words hit Richard like a fist. Mad at... He stood abruptly, took a step toward Tyler, then stopped, suddenly uncertain. Tyler, no, I'm not... But Tyler couldn't hear him. Richard looked at his hands. The hands that had signed million-dollar deals, that had shaken hands with senators, that had never once learned to say I love you in his own son's language. I don't know how to talk to my own son. He said it out loud, to the cabin, to himself, to anyone who would listen. The words fell into silence. Then Mrs. Patterson started to clap, slow, deliberate, the sound of one pair of hands in the quiet cabin. Another person joined, then another. The applause spread, through first class, through business class. Someone pulled back the curtain to economy, and the clapping rippled backward. Rows of passengers who didn't know what had happened but felt the shift, felt the release of tension that had gripped the whole plane. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was something quieter, more profound, acknowledgement. Tyler looked around, confused by the vibrations, by the movement. Daisy signed to him. They're clapping. For you. For me. For you. 'Cause you were brave. Tyler's eyes went wide. He looked at his father. Richard was crying. Openly. In first class. In front of strangers. The tears ran down his face and he didn't wipe them away. Daisy stood, walked to him. Mr. Ashford. He looked down at her. This small girl in her worn clothes, this stranger's daughter who had done the impossible. Would you like to learn? She asked. Learn? To talk to Tyler. I can show you some signs, just a few. Enough to start. Richard stared at her. At this 10-year-old child offering him something all his money had never bought. A way in. He looked at Diane, standing at the edge of first class. The woman he'd dismissed. The school janitor. Ma'am, he said. His voice was hoarse. I owe you both an apology. Diane nodded. Didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I looked at you and I didn't... He stopped. Swallowed. I didn't see you. Either of you. I saw what I expected to see. And I was wrong. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't explain. Didn't make excuses. Just the truth. raw and simple. Diane nodded again. We know. Richard turned back to Daisy. Yes, he said. I would like to learn. Daisy smiled. She took his hand, this billionaire's hand, soft and manicured, and led him to the floor where Tyler sat. Sit down, she said. This is the first sign. She raised her flat hand to her forehead in a small salute, then brought it outward. Hello? Richard copied her, clumsy, uncertain. Tyler watched his father's hands move. His face went through something complicated. Surprise, confusion, hope. Then Tyler raised his own hand, made the same sign. Hello, father to son, son to father, the first word they'd ever truly shared. The cabin was quiet again, but it was the quiet after a storm, the quiet of something healing. Mrs. Patterson sat back down, dabbing her eyes. Well, she murmured, it seems there's still hope for us after all. The rest of the flight passed in a different kind of silence. Richard gave up his first-class seat, just stood up and told Daisy and Diane to take it, and before they could refuse, he was already sitting in 34C, the middle seat, last row, next to the bathroom. He didn't complain, didn't even seem to notice. Daisy sat with Tyler for the remaining 3 hours. They told stories back and forth. Cloud the cat had adventures now, a whole mythology building between them. Cloud rescued other lost animals. Cloud learned to swim in clouds made of water. Cloud found a family of birds who adopted him. Tyler invented half of them. His hands moved with growing confidence, growing joy. Diane watched from across the aisle. She'd refused Richard's seat at first. I've sat in coach my whole life, Mr. Ashford. I can manage a few more hours. But the flight attendant had insisted, and honestly, her back was killing her. So she sat in first-class leather, sipping orange juice that actually tasted like oranges, and watched her daughter change a life. Richard appeared during the last hour. He'd been watching from the back, Diane realized. Just watching. Processing. He sat in the aisle seat beside Diane. Mrs. Owens. Ms., she corrected. Not sharp, just factual. Ms. Owens. He paused. What made your daughter learn sign language? Diane looked at Daisy, at her hands moving, at Tyler's rapt face. My students, she said. I work nights at Jefferson School for the Deaf, cleaning. But Daisy comes with me sometimes when she doesn't have school the next day. She started learning when she was 4. Said the other kids talked with their hands and she wanted to understand them. 4 years old. She's always been like that. Sees someone on the outside, wants to bring them in. Richard was quiet for a long moment. I pulled Tyler out of deaf school 2 years ago, he said. The specialists said mainstream education would be better. With the cochlear implant, with speech therapy, he could be normal. The word hung in the air. Normal. I thought I was helping him, Richard continued. I thought I was giving him the best chance. But he started having meltdowns. Wouldn't look at me. The specialists said it was an adjustment period. He laughed, bitter. 2 years of adjustment. Diane didn't respond, didn't feel the need to fill the silence with comfort. He had friends at that school, Richard said. Other deaf kids. A teacher who used sign language for everything. He used to come home and tell me about it, his hands moving so fast I couldn't follow. His voice cracked. I used to ask him to slow down, to use his words, his spoken words. He wiped his face. I stopped him from talking, he said. I thought I was teaching him to communicate, and instead I just stopped him from talking. Diane let him sit with that. It's not too late, she said finally. Richard looked at her. Tyler's 7, she said. He's got his whole life, and he just spent 3 hours telling stories with a girl he met on an airplane. He hasn't forgotten how to talk, Mr. Ashford. He's just been waiting for someone to listen. Richard's jaw worked. He nodded. Ms. Owens, what you do at the school? I clean. You raised that girl. He gestured toward Daisy. That's not cleaning. That's something else entirely. Diane didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded. The captain's voice crackled overhead, beginning descent into JFK. Flight attendants, prepare for arrival. Daisy looked up, signed something to Tyler. He nodded, then signed back rapidly. What's he saying? Richard asked. Diane smiled slightly. I think he's asking if he'll see her again. Richard watched his son's face, the hope there, the fear. He made a decision. Ms. Owens, when we land, could I have a word with you? Both of you? Diane looked at him, measured him. We'll see, she said. JFK Terminal, 6 a.m. Gray light through dirty windows. The passengers filed off the plane in that shuffling, exhausted way of overnight flights. But something was different. People kept looking back, smiling at the small girl with cornrows walking beside a boy who was signing rapidly at his father. Richard Ashford was trying. His signs were wrong, hilariously wrong sometimes. Tyler kept correcting him, patient the way children are when adults finally try to learn. Daisy walked beside them, offering pointers. No, Mr. Ashford, that sign means toilet. You want... Dear God. It's okay. Tyler thinks it's funny. Tyler was, in fact, laughing. Actually laughing. The sound rusty, unpracticed, but real. Richard didn't seem to mind being the joke. He tried again, got it slightly less wrong. Mrs. Patterson passed them near the gate. She stopped, took Daisy's hands in both of hers. Young lady? Her eyes were bright. You reminded an old woman that courage doesn't care about seat assignments, or about anything else for that matter. Daisy smiled. Thank you, ma'am. You keep being exactly who you are. The world needs more people who sit down on floors. She squeezed Daisy's hands, nodded at Diane, and walked off toward baggage claim. Richard approached Diane near the terminal windows. Ms. Owens, could I speak with you for a moment? Diane glanced at Daisy, who was showing Tyler how to sign airplane. The boy was entranced. Go ahead. Richard pulled a business card from his wallet. Heavy cardstock. Embossed lettering. The Ashford Foundation runs educational programs, he said, including scholarships, full scholarships, for exceptional students. He held out the card. I would like to offer one to Daisy. Best school in the city, all expenses covered. She deserves opportunities I never gave her credit for being able to earn. Diane looked at the card. Didn't take it. We don't need charity, Mr. Ashford. It's not charity. His voice was firm but humble. It's... He searched for the word. Accountability. Gratitude. I should have listened to you both from the start. This is me, trying to make that right. Diane studied him, looking for the angle, the catch, finding maybe something that wasn't there before, something cracked open. There's something else, Richard said. The foundation is opening a new center next year. Support services for families with deaf children. Counseling, resources, community building. He paused. We're looking for someone to run the family outreach program, someone who understands, someone the families will trust. Diane's eyebrows rose. The job pays well, Richard continued. Benefits, normal hours, no more night shifts. And you'd be doing work that matters. Work like what your daughter just did on that plane. Diane was quiet for a long moment. I'll think about it, she said finally. Richard nodded. He knew that was all he'd get right now. And he knew he was lucky to get that much. Tyler came running over, Daisy behind him. He signed something rapid at his father. Richard looked helplessly at Daisy. "He wants to know if I can come visit sometime," Daisy translated. "He wants to hear more about Cloud." Richard looked at his son, at the hope blazing in those small eyes. "Would that be okay?" he asked Diane. "Maybe we could arrange play dates or—" "We'll see," Diane said again, but softer this time. Tyler signed at Daisy. "See you again?" Daisy signed back. "Always, little friend." Tyler threw his arms around her, a fierce, sudden hug. Richard watched. His son, who flinched from touch, who fought being held, hugging a stranger's daughter like she was the most important person in the world. He cleared his throat. "Ms. Owens, one more thing." He pulled out his phone. "Could I get Tyler enrolled in sign language classes? Real ones. And—" he took a breath. "And myself. I need to learn. I should have learned years ago." Diane smiled, just slightly. "I know a school," she said. The terminal bustled around them, travelers rushing to connections, to families, to lives. But here, in this small circle near Gate 42, something had changed. Richard Ashford flew to New York that night. But he landed somewhere else entirely. He started ASL classes the next week. Tyler was his teacher. And Daisy Owens, 10 years old, janitor's daughter, girl from seat 34C, went home knowing something she'd carry for the rest of her life. Sometimes the loudest voice in the room is the one that doesn't make a sound. And sometimes the one who has the least is the one who gives the most. Silence. 2 seconds.
This story shouldn't be the exception. It should be the last time it ever happens. At Beat Stories, we turn one moment of injustice into a call for change. Subscribe to help make that call louder and longer lasting.